Hello, everyone. Welcome to AI-Praxis. I'm Amit, and I'll be your instructor throughout this design thinking course. Now, whether you're a student, a professional, an entrepreneur, or someone who simply enjoys solving problems, this particular course is for you. Now, before we begin, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever used an app, a website, a product, and wondered who designed this? Maybe the app was confusing, maybe the website was difficult to navigate, or maybe a simple task took far longer than it should have. We have all been there. Now, let me ask you another question. Have you ever worked hard on something like a project, a presentation, a product, or even an idea, and later realized that people didn't use it the way you expected? If your answer is yes, you're not alone. In fact, research by CB Insights found that 35% of startups fail because there's no market, a need for what they actually build. In other words, many teams don't fail because they can't build. They fail because they build the wrong thing. And that's exactly what this course is about. How do we make sure we are solving the right problem before building the solution? And the answer lies in design thinking. Over the next few sessions, you will learn a practical framework that helps you understand people, identify right problems, and design solutions that truly matter. But before we learn the framework, we need to understand why the world's smartest teams still make this mistake. So, in the next few minutes, I'll share three true stories from three very different industries, different people, different challenges, one common lesson. And once you see that pattern, you will never look at problem solving the same way again. So, let's get started. Now, before we go any further, I would like to, ask two simple questions. Take a moment to think about them honestly. Don't answer them for me, right? Uh, Answer them for yourself. So, the first question is: have you ever used a product, an app, a website, a device, or even a service, and thought, who designed this? Right? Maybe it was confusing, maybe it took many steps, maybe it solved one problem but created three new ones. If you ever felt that way, you're not alone, and almost everyone has, right? And let's move to the second question. Have you ever built something like I already discussed, a presentation, report, maybe a project, a business idea, or a product, or sometimes even a simple process that actually didn't work the way you expected? Maybe people ignored it, maybe they used it differently, maybe they didn't use it at all. And if your answer is yes, you're actually at the right place. So welcome to the world, to the real world, because every designer, every entrepreneur, every engineer, every manager, and every innovator has experienced this at some point. The difference between successful innovators and everyone else is not intelligence. It's actually not experience. And it's certainly not luck. The difference is that successful innovators spend more time understanding the problem, than jumping the solution. And that's exactly the gap design thinking, helps us close. So now that we have all admitted we've been on both sides using poorly designed products and creating things that didn't work as expected, let's look at a story that changed the way the world thinks about innovation. So, our first story begins in 1999. An American television program called ABC Nightline gave one of the world's leading design companies, IDEO, okay, an unusual challenge. The challenge was redesign the supermarket shopping cart in just 5 days. Now, you might think the team would immediately start, sketching ideas or discussing few features or building prototypes, but that's not what they did instead. They spent the entire first day doing something completely different. They went to supermarkets, they watched people shop, they observed parents with children, they spoke to store employees, they timed checkout lines, they looked for problems that most people had simply accepted as normal. Only after understanding real people and real situations did they begin designing. And what they discovered was surprising. The biggest problems were not the size of the cart or its appearance. The real problem were child safety, hygiene, and making shopping more convenient. Those insights came from observation, not imagination. So, over the next few days, the team generated dozens of ideas, built quick prototypes, tested them, and improved them. The result wasn't just a better shopping cart, it became one of the world's most famous examples of human centered design. And I repeat, human centered design. And it taught us a lesson that goes far beyond shopping carts. Great design doesn't begin with ideas, great design begins with understanding people. So let's take a closer look at what the IDEO team actually did over those 5 days. Day one, they observed. The team actually didn't design anything, no brainstorming, no sketches, no meetings to discuss solutions. Instead, they went out to the real world, they watched people shop, they observed how customers pushed their carts, how parents managed children, and how employees handled the carts every day. Because before solving a problem, they wanted to understand it. Day two and day three were for define and ideate. After collecting all those observations, the team started looking for patterns. What were people struggling with? Which problems mattered the most? They discovered that safety and hygiene were much higher concerns than the cart's appearance. Once the problem was clear, the team generated dozens of possible solutions. At this stage, there was no bad ideas. The goal was to explore many possibilities before choosing one. Day four was prototype. Now it was time to build not a perfect product, just quick, simple prototypes. Some were made from foam, some from PVC pipes, others used basic materials that could be assembled quickly. The purpose wasn't to impress anyone, it was to learn what worked and what didn't. Day five was all about present and refine. So finally, the team presented a completely redefined shopping cart. It included improvements for child safety, better redesigned shopping cart. It included improvements for, let's say, modular baskets and more efficient shopping experience. In fact, better hygiene also. But the most important achievement wasn't the cart itself. It was how they arrived at the solution. They didn't design based on opinions, they designed based on evidence. So, what's the big lesson? This 5 day challenge teaches us an important principle. Don't fall in love with your first idea. Fall in love with understanding the problem, because when you truly understand people, better solutions naturally follow. Let's move from supermarkets to a hospital. Imagine you've just had surgery, you're in pain, you wake up in your hospital bed and need help. Naturally, you reach for the nurse, call button, but there's a problem. You can't reach it, not because it's broken, not because you don't know how to use it, simply because it's placed too far away. Now imagine being in pain, unable to call for help, while the solution is sitting just a few inches beyond your reach. That's exactly what happened in a hospital. The engineers who designed the room had placed the call button where it looked convenient and consistent. but they had never watched a real patient try to use it after surgery. When hospital staff finally observed patients, they noticed the problem immediately. The button was simply too far away. The solution was surprisingly simple: move the button closer. It took only a few minutes to make the change, but the impact was remarkable. Patient distress calls reduced significantly because patients could now reach the button when they needed help. The lesson is powerful. The problem was never the technology, the problem was the assumption. No one had taken the time to observe the patient. Sometimes the biggest innovations don't require a bigger project, they simply require a better understanding of people. So, what's the key takeaway? If you don't observe real users, you'll end up designing for your assumptions instead of their reality. Our final story takes us beyond Earth, all the way to Mars. So in 1999, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter, which is a spacecraft built to study the Martian atmosphere. It was the result of years of work by highly skilled scientists and engineers. The mission cost approximately 327 million US dollars. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until it reached Mars. Instead of entering the correct orbit, the spacecraft drifted too close to the planet, entered the atmosphere at the wrong angle, and was lost forever. The mission was over. So, what went wrong? Was there a hardware failure? No. Was the spacecraft poorly designed? No. The problem was much simpler. One engineering team calculated data using metric units. Another team interpreted the data, the same data, in fact, using imperial units. And both teams assumed they were using the same measurement system. Nobody stopped to ask one simple question: what units are you using? That single assumption cost an entire space mission. The lesson isn't about mathematics, it isn't even about engineering. It is about communication, it's about assumptions, and it's about understanding the people you work with, not just the people you build for. So, design thinking reminds us that empathy doesn't stop with the customer, it also includes teammates, partners, stakeholders, and everyone involved in solving the problem. Sometimes one unanswered question can become the most expensive mistake in a project. So, what's the key takeaway? Never assume, ask, verify, test, because assumptions are invisible until they become failures. So far, we have understood why design thinking is needed. Now, let's answer the obvious question: what exactly is design thinking? Simply put, design thinking uh, could be a human centered approach to solving problems. What does that mean? It means that instead of starting with a solution, we start with people. We first understand their needs, we observe their challenges, we ask questions, we identify the real problem. Only then we begin designing a solution. So, in other words, design thinking helps us solve the right problem before trying to build the solution. This approach combines three important elements: people, technology, and business. People, because understanding what real users truly need; technology, because exploring what is technically possible; and business, which means making sure the solution is practical, sustainable, and creates values. When these three come together, that's where meaningful innovation happens. One more thing is important to remember: design thinking is not a straight line. You don't simply move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and finish. As you learn more about your users, you may discover new insights. That often means going back, improving your ideas, and testing them again. So think of design thinking as a journey of continuous learning, not a one-time process. So over the next few sessions, we'll walk through each stage together, and you will learn not only what each stage is, but also how to apply it to the real world problems, right? So now that you know already what design thinking is, let me just give you a quick sneak peek into all the 5 stages, right? Think of these stages as your roadmap. They help us move from understanding a problem to creating a solution that people actually need. Okay, let's quickly go through them. So, stage one is empathize. Now, everything begins with people. We observe, we ask questions, we listen carefully. Our goal is to understand the user's needs, challenges, and experiences, in fact, feel their pain. Okay, then the stage two is all about define. Once we've gathered enough information, we organize our observations, we identify the real problem that needs to be solved. And all these observations actually lead to something called insights. With those insights, a well-defined problem is already created, and you know that a well-defined problem is already half solved. Stage number 3 is ideate. It's time to generate ideas now. At this stage, we don't judge ideas too quickly. Instead, we explore different possibilities and encourage creative thinking before selecting the right solution. Stage 4 is all about prototype. We build a simple version of our idea, and this is not a final product, just something quick that people can see, use, and react to. The purpose is to learn, not to be perfect. And stage 5 is all about test. Finally, we take our prototype to real users. We observe how they use it, we collect feedback, we learn what works, what doesn't, and what needs improvement. Sometimes the feedback is so valuable that we return to an earlier stage and improve our solution. And that's perfectly normal. In fact, that's exactly how design thinking works. It's an iterative process. We learn, improve, and test again until we create something that truly solves the problem. So, if you remember these 5 stages empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test you will always know where you are in the design thinking journey. Okay. So, this particular, you can say, framework, right? Or in fact, these 5 stages uh, came from, Stanford University, in fact, right? And that's where the IDEO CEO, the then, right, Tim Brown, he actually gave a complete definition. And that definition is very simple. Design thinking is a human centric approach because that's where we started with empathize, right? To innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements of business success. So far, we have explored what design thinking is and why it matters. Now it's time to put into practice. Throughout this course, you will work on one real problem, not a hypothetical case, not a made up example, a real problem that affects a real person. Why? Because design thinking is based on human centric approach. It's best learned by doing. The more real your problem is, the more meaningful your learning will be. You can choose a challenge from any area that interests you. For example, take education. How can we help students stay focused while studying at home? This could be healthcare. How can we make it easier for patients to understand and follow their medication instructions, right? Let's take the example of transportation. How can we improve the daily commute for people who spend more time waiting than traveling? Food. How can busy professionals prepare healthy meals without spending hours in the kitchen? Finance, how can we help first time earners save money consistently? Or choose a problem you have personally observed in your daily life. Whatever you choose, remember these three simple rules. The first rule is focus on one specific person, not students, not customers, not everyone, one specific person. That's one. Second, focus on one specific problem, not a broad issue, one clear challenge that you can observe and understand. The third one is describe your challenge in one sentence. If you can explain your problem clearly in one sentence, you are ready uh, to actually go ahead. Take a few minutes to think about your challenge, write it down. Don't worry about finding the perfect problem. You will refine it as we move through the design thinking process. So you have chosen your design challenge. That's great. But before we begin solving it, let's make sure we're solving the right problem. And this is where AI can be very useful thinking partner. Yes, thinking partner. Notice that I said thinking partner and not a decision maker. So AI should help you ask better questions. It should never replace talking to real people. So here's a simple prompt you can use with ChatGPT or any similar AI tool. Use Gemini, Perplexity, whatever. Right. And tell the AI about your design challenge and ask it to simple. Make your user more specific. Identify the real human need behind the problem. List the assumptions you're making. Suggest the one question you should answer before designing any solution. The AI might point out things that you hadn't considered. Maybe your user is too broad. Maybe the real problem is different from the one you first identified. Or maybe you're making assumptions that need to be tested. All of these insights are valuable. But remember, AI can suggest, only real users can perform. So, design thinking is built on observation, conversations, and feedback from real people. Use AI to sharpen your thinking, use people to validate your thinking, and that's the difference. So, the key takeaway here is AI helps you ask better questions, right? People help you find the right answers. So, congratulations, you have just completed the first session of our design thinking journey. And let's quickly look back at what we have learned today. We began with a simple question. Remember, why do smart people build the wrong things? And then we explored three real stories. And those were like a shopping cart, a hospital, and of course, a NASA space mission. Different industries, different challenges, but all of them taught us the same lesson. The biggest mistakes don't happen because people aren't smart. They happen because people make assumptions instead of understanding the problem first. We also learned what design thinking is, a human centered approach that helps us understand people before creating solutions. And then we looked at its five stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. And these five stages will guide us through the course. Finally, you selected your own design challenge, a real person, a real problem, and a challenge you will continue working in the upcoming sessions. Remember, good solutions don't begin with great ideas, they begin with great understanding. And that's exactly what we'll focus on next. So, in the next session, we will begin with the first and perhaps the most important stage of design thinking, and that's empathize. You will learn how to observe people, ask meaningful questions, conduct user interviews, and uncover insights that most people miss. Because before we design for people, we must first understand them. And I'll see you in the next session. Thank you for watching and happy learning.